Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac with me. Welcome, Mac.
Good evening.
Tonight we're going to be going over the semifinals of the 2024 Euros before we preview the finals taking place this week on Sunday. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @housea_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. All right, Mac, we have to cover the semifinal matches that took place over the last 2 days. I guess 3 days day of recording. I know I mentioned, I started off our last podcast saying these games have been a little bit boring. Some people have said this tournament, for certain parts of it, have been, we've seen a lot of boring football. But if you were a lucky soul and didn't tune into these matches early on, you must have missed some bangers. And of course, we have to start off with Spain versus France. Spain getting the 2-1 comeback win against, of course, France. A lot of action taking place early on, and I think all 3 goals in the first half. Let's go over it. I think this was a tough one to call, but eventually the team with the better tournament won the game. And that's not to say that Spain's the better team, because as we know, France have that quality, and they did show the quality throughout the game. Except when it mattered in the second half, when they were chasing the goal, it didn't look like they had the extra player that would take them over the edge. Whereas Spain, even though they had to come back from a 1-0 deficit, after getting scored on, it looked like their game plan didn't really change, and they actually maybe were even more driven to actually go out on the attack, control the game, much like how we've seen them do the whole tournament. Get their banger of the goal through Lamine Yamal, which we'll cover, and then of course the fantastic Dani Olmo, who's had quite the tournament so far. And if we are sort of looking at players that may make a big move following their tournament performances, could be in for a new move himself. But Mac, I know I covered a lot. Let's hear from you overall. What were your takes from the game?
So for me, both of these games that we'll talk about today kind of very, very similar, where a lot of it was decided in the first half. One first game that we're talking about in terms of a lack of endeavor, and conversely on the other side is where kind of a treat from the start for Netherlands versus England. But to zero in on this individual game, I think when you're looking at the initial lineups, you can see France was trying something a little bit different, kind of wary of Spain's attack. And you can see that initially just how they line up to start the game. Normally, you've seen Antoine Griezmann play as more of a traditional 10 going into games for France thus far this tournament. I don't know if it's because maybe they felt that he's been playing poorly thus far this tournament, or again, with that fear of what Spain has done thus far. But they win with the midfield 3 of Adrien Rabiot, Tchouaméni, and N'Golo Kanté. And for me, from the onset, you could see the disparity in attacking threat between the France to Spanish team. And what that did allow, and for me, the way that Spain actually ended up winning this game, it wasn't because they did a great job of, okay, we're going to make sure our one-on-one battles between Mbappe and Dembele, they're solid enough, or we're going to dictate the entire game by having possession for majority of it, which they did, but not to, I would say, as a dominant Spanish degree as we've seen in previous tournaments. But it was because they kind of like take the oxygen out of the air with the press and how methodical they are, and with how defensively oriented France was from the onset, where they couldn't break lines to get into the final third for France to really cause problems against the Spanish. So for me, it was kind of a mishap on Deschamps with that initial change when you're looking at the starting lineups. And in that first half, that kind of all action from even though they did come away with that first goal, it really felt like, for me, at the very least, that France was never really taking charge of the game, and it was just a matter of time before Spain would not just get back into it, but go ahead and take that lead. And then from there on in, dare France to beat them, which we've not seen them do thus far this tournament against really any team. So for me, again, it's kind of stereotypical thus far, and it seems like it was as what we would expect if we just base it on just this tournament's performance. So I'm not surprised necessarily with the result, not surprised necessarily with how it happened, but I am surprised with, again, like I said, the initial start of how France lined up and what really set them up to have a overall, I would argue, poor game.
Yeah, of course, we have to credit though Spain in the individual moments and players that, like I highlighted already, from their goals, Lamine Yamal and Dani Olmo. But of course, Rodri, Fabian Ruiz have been really good as well to not just control games, but they just know when the type of pass that they need to make and the weight of pass that they need to sort of either take the ball out of pressure and open space up, or just to speed things up when needed. And even having Jesus Navas, who's I would argue, of course, traditionally a winger, previous to his more recent role as wide back, for the second goal, where Lamine Yamal is able to cut in. Jesus Navas is able to provide width down that right-hand side. Not saying Carvajal wouldn't have done the same, but it's more natural for him to do so. And then, of course, Olmo, fantastic first touch after sort of clearance, and then second touch, which the goal I think is given to him. It, of course, had a lot to do with Jules Koundé unable to get anything on that, but give credit to him for getting that goal. On the flip side, like you said, Mac, even though France sort of didn't start the way we would have expected them, they also didn't close the game with that. I wouldn't necessarily say free-flowing offense, but that big name and big moment player and I have to go back to him, of course, Olivier Giroud, who I think is a big winner in this French team, because it shows that he hasn't been able to be replaced, and even though Colomwani got that goal, he eventually came off, and like you said, all tournament, Marcus Thuram hasn't had the best tournament as Euros at all. So it's questions about France on whether the two backup strikers behind Giroud will have enough to bring them forward, or will Kylian Mbappe have that next step for him? Because, of course, this tournament he hasn't played quite as well, and not sure if it's down to his personal injury or simply France may be going through a transitional period. What are your, I guess, overall takes on the French side, I guess, as we, of course, know they will be going home and Spain are going through?
So for France, I think, again, are you still worried about them going forward, them not having enough talent to be able to proceed deep into tournaments going forward? No. Again, if you ask me right now who's my favorite to win the World Cup in a couple of years, probably still France, right? That just natural terms of the amount of talent they have, the age profile. If you look at everybody that played started the game, there was only one player over the age of 30. That was N'Golo Kante. So for me, they still are have quality throughout the pitch. The striker position, I do agree. That's the biggest area of concern, where a lot of people had a Marcus Thuram that kind of pegged in as that natural striker, that heir apparent, the next one up. But he was so poor this tournament that he didn't even touch the pitch against Spain. So for me, I think that is an interesting area where they'll have to address and have to be able to figure out some options. As natural as every national team does, is where you don't really get to pick and choose who's born or is eligible to play for your country, and that's one area of the pitch, aside from every other area of the pitch, that they're lacking depth. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Is there evolution? Is there a young player we probably don't even know about that's going to come up and surprise us all? Quite possibly. But for me, the interesting part for me is afterwards with Didier Deschamps saying that he's going to stay on to be able to continue to coach. So, yeah, like a lot of people, and to go towards them in terms of this, if they had won the game, I feel like their tournament had very much mirrored what England's done, where have they been lucky or have they been good, or have they been good enough to be lucky, right? It's a very interesting question of where you kind of flip on that side. And if you end up winning the game, you can just say, hey, we've been good enough and it is what it is. But I think this, let's say the regressive defensive play style we've seen from France, where even when you look back at the World Cup win under Deschamps, it was really only the final where they scored a whole lot of goals against Croatia, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar play style. I would have liked to see maybe more of an evolution where, because similar to England, you have this attacking threat, you have this talent. How come seems like we're not getting enough juice out of the melon here? But in terms of their direct quality, what they can provide in tournaments, there's no questions front to back across the entire pitch, that they're still one of the best teams, if not the best team in the world on paper.
Okay, well, of course, we do have to cover Spain, and we will cover them in our second part with a preview. But of course, we'd have to mention one of the biggest headlines: Lamine Yamal getting a fantastic goal straight after Adrian Rabiot came out and said he needs to perform to get to the finals. He scores that banger, which, as you listeners may know, we also dabble in a little bit of basketball. Mac more than myself. It looks like to me that Lamine Yamal is I have a player on an ISO. I'm gonna take a couple dribbles at him, step back, drain that over him because Rabiot was the defender that was trying to guard him at that point, and he hits the shot that's perfectly off the post. His last game as a 16-year-old for Spain, of course, his birthday coming up the day before the final, so on Saturdays. Mac, any quick points? I know we're going to cover them more, but any quick points on not just Lamine Yamal, but how Spain have gotten through to the final so far this tournament?
I think, again, it's really been, and the key points for me going into this game of why I feel like they can be a threat against any team in the world. And I think that they will and are the favorites going into the game against England, predominantly because of the play of both Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams on either side of the pitch, where they've dubbed them the two Ferraris, where you're talking about consistent pace, willingness, like they're so young that they don't maybe not to put them down in some ways, but they don't understand the consequences of the games that they're in, where a lot of players play their whole career to just, sit on the bench and watch this game, let alone get to play in it, get to star in it, get to take risks to score and create opportunities. For me, those two individual players above everything else. I know there's a lot of plaudits going to like Rodri, and maybe even the player of the tournament thus far for Spain is Fabian Ruiz. I think he's been absolutely phenomenal. But the reason why they are where they are is because of those two players and their attacking threat, where it seems like even if one of them have a quote unquote off game, the other one is a 10 out of 10 star making type of performance. And that's what Yamal was in the semifinal against France. So absolutely love to see. Great comparison there. It's definitely Steph Curry with the shot, as they could say. But they're two exciting all talent teams, and I think right now, if you would ask me, either of these players probably could walk into most teams in the world and start. So I'm very excited to see what they continue to do going forward, and they've definitely set themselves up where, not just in this tournament, through international football, on either side of the wing for the next 10 years, they're threats to be reckoned with.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side, they will be facing England, who got the win over the Netherlands, Mac. And again, a game that started quite early, another banger of a goal with a player, from a player, Mac, that you kind of called out last time out. And Xavi Simons stepped up and made it 1-0 inside 10 minutes for the Netherlands after getting ahead of Rice for that loose ball. England were able to come back, though, for themselves through a penalty. And, of course, we all know eventually the winner. How did you see this game, Mac? Were you sort of surprised or anything stood out to you from this game?
So the first part in regards to Xavi Simons in terms of scoring that goal, for me, he had to be I would argue, one of the best players on the pitch for Netherlands to walk away with the win. He was for early on, and looked like he potentially could be one of the players to match. But aside from that goal, I don't remember him into really part of any intricate plays in Netherlands on the break. And for me, similar to the other game, in regards to Spain versus France and Netherlands versus England, it was the first half that for me kind of set the stage of the rest of the game that we're going to have. And for me, it starts with actually the initial setup for Netherlands, where they're playing in a 4-2-3-1 formation. And they try to be a little bit more aggressive. They try to be a little bit more front foot. And they try to go man-to-man in the midfield to block out Foden, Bellingham, Declan Rice, and Kobe Mainoo. But they get outnumbered and they get outworked in those positions for the first 35 minutes, where even though the game was tied, I felt like at that point, the only team that was going to win, unless it was from a mistake from England, was England themselves. They were on the ball. They were on the front foot. They played the best 35 minutes that they had played thus far in this tournament, because Netherlands maybe thought that they could be a little bit more adventurous, that they can outwork the English in the midfield, where they can kind of deny that talent. But it wasn't to be. And the injury to Memphis Depay kind of papered over a change that was made in the 30th minute where they added an extra body in midfield. Netherlands became even more defensive, offered no threat going forward aside from set pieces. But at least we're saying, hey, we're not going to give them the free reign in the midfield. And that's where you saw the game revert back to what England had done against all these other teams played thus far this tournament, where they kind of keep possession in and around the box. They aren't really incisive at getting through, of course, until the last kick of the game in all actuality. But for me, it was that chunk of time where Netherlands, we can come play. Oh, wait, they're too big of a threat for us to be able to manage. They're going to cut through us like a knife through butter. We got to be able to reshape it. We got to rejig our lineup. They did that. But for me, that set on for the rest of the game where it was just, is England going to score or is this game going to end up in penalties? And that was one of the two outcomes. And England did eventually score. So for me, this game, again, it was decided in the first half of how the game played and the disparity of quality between these two teams.
Yeah, definitely got to give credit to England the way they started the game, but also after they conceded, the way they, again, like they did against Slovakia in the round of 16. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember exactly who they faced. And of course, they did also concede against. Oh, now I can't even remember who they played. But of course, in previous games, they've conceded first and battled back to get the wins. This is the perfect time for them to sort of hit form, if you can sort of call it that, because in this game, players who we were calling out a little bit, myself included, Phil Foden, had his best game of the tournament. Players around him looked better because I would say he was sort of integral to moving the ball and getting everyone involved. But of course, we have to mention another midfielder as well, in Kobe Mainu, who had also, we can easily say, his best game over the tournament so far. So great for them to sort of step it up at this point. And we're going to have to see, of course, what happens next. Though we have to go back to, Mac, how England were able to tie that game up inside 20 minutes. And of course, that's 10 minutes after they conceded. Harry Kane goes down to the box, and initially the referee doesn't give a penalty call, but upon the review from VAR, he gets called over to take a look at that, and he of course awards the penalty. Harry Kane, big penalty for him actually to step up, of course, in the World Cup against France. He's the one who misses the game time penalty. This time around, he converts it, and England are back to a sort of level and go on to play the way they did. But on that call, I wasn't sold on the penalty call, to say the least. Let me hear your thoughts on that, though, Mac.
I can understand where you're coming from. That if it wasn't called, would I have been shocked? Would England argue about it at the end of the game? Absolutely. However, I think the adage now is where the difference between what's a penalty and what's not a penalty has become, in terms, it's been so thin. What I mean by this is is that a foul anywhere else across the pitch? Yes. So then should it be a foul in the penalty box? Probably, right? But I could see it either way, where 6 years ago, that's not called. My problem more so is where the on-field decision initially was made where that's not one. So the VAR should be stepping in if it's an error, egregious mistake, that type of thing. That verbiage has always been used as where it's only under if there's like an obscene error in justice, VAR should be stepping in. Does this qualify as that? That's where I'll be, no, probably not. So I can see it from either side. I can see the argument from either side. However, I will say from an English fan's perspective, because this is where I'm coming from, they've been hard done in tournaments before. I don't have to bring up Germany, Frank Lampard's goal going in. So will they take a little shit housery and some fortunate calls the other way around? Hey, I won't complain. Maybe we owe a little bit of luck that way. But I could see it. I could absolutely see it either way. It's unfortunate that that's kind of what led England. That was the way that England ended up getting back into the game, because very much they deserve to, based on their kind of the way that they were playing, the opportunities they were creating. They were the one team that was a threat. So it is unfortunate that did come that way. But I'm not 100% saying that I say it shouldn't have been called, but I do see your point, and I'm definitely kind of tilting on either edge of, okay, I could see it go either way, really.
Exactly. So that ties it up, and of course we know at the end of the game, Ollie Watkins. What a story for him to be called up for this year's Euros, having such a great regular season with Aston Villa. Him getting the assist by none other than our boy Cole Palmer. These substitutions, and I think I'm using it correctly. Southgate doesn't call them substitutions; he calls them finishers because of course they step up and give the all vital goal in the end. How, I guess, what are your thoughts on the squad depth that England have used so far, and how important is it for them, all of them, to sort of click in now, especially ahead of the finals?
So what? I hate that term finishers. I absolutely despise it. I will roll my eyes because it's like, so it's again, we're going to make the comparison to basketball here. It makes more sense there in that game because you're a sub. Maybe you play more minutes than the starter. So then that makes more sense where even though you're a substitute, kind of like the Manu Ginobili, you'll come off the bench, but then you'll finish the game. You play more minutes than the player that you're subbing on for. It's not the case in football, bro. Okay, they were coming on. They are subs. It is what it is. I understand you want to morale. That's nice. That's good for you. I hate it. I roll my eyes every time I hear it. But the depth options that he does have, where Southgate, again, there have been people that have faded on him. Raise your hand if you have. I am raising my hand. It is what it is. But what he's done, and you got to give him credit to, is where he's picked the right moments for the right look. The difference being is where, we need a backup striker. The natural thought is after in the previous game where he brought in Ivan Toney, he scored a penalty against Switzerland. Absolutely cool, comic like doing so. Harry Kane's injured. You bring back onto Ivan Toney. That's what you just did. No, I need a different profile player. Here's how I can take advantage of that. Here's how I can create a goal. Here's how I can map it out mentally. And this is what could happen on the pitch. And it does. So you have to give him credit that way, where this is the type of manifestation that they're looking for. And even I think Ollie Watkins after the game was talking about is that before he was being subbed on, him and Cole Palmer were talking. He's like, you know what's going to happen is we're going to go on. You're going to give me the ball and I'm going to score. And that's exactly what they did in terms of he understands. And I think a lot of people have critiqued his play style, maybe his tactics, but his man management, I don't think anyone could question, where, okay, he keeps these players motivated and ready, where even this is only Ollie Watkins' only minutes, he was ready to be able to kind of get into the game, be on the pitch and have an impact. So it was great to see there and the impact that they did have, because that, I think even kind of watching it live, it wasn't like it was a clear-cut opportunity. The expected goal on that shot was 0.06%, so it's
right,
6% chance of going in. So it's not a high-quality chance, but that is his type of goal. That is an Ollie Watkins type of finish. So it was lovely to see for him to be able to get that moment, and for Southgate now gets to really earn those plaudits of, okay, you know what? These are the reasons why I've made these certain changes, and they kind of bear fruit in big moments.
Right, and great management from Gareth Southgate there. Let's flip it on, and just to end off this part of the podcast, to, of course, the eventual runners-up in this case. Ronald Koeman, of course, a depleted side without Cup Miners, Frankie de Jong, among others, for this tournament, but they still made it to the semifinals, and it looks like, though they were much like France in a sense, lacking that finishing or finisher. Of course, we know Cody Gakpo had a decent tournament. Javison stepped up when needed, but Wout Weghorst coming on as your sort of main choice towards the end of the game to sort of get a goal. Not the best look for them. I think they overperformed to get to the stage, but nonetheless, got to give them credit because foundationally they have a great back line. Could use a little bit of help in midfield, but maybe the turnaround for them is not as far as we expected. Final thoughts on the Netherlands, Matt?
For now, I think that they definitely played above their breaches in this tournament thus far. Similar to England, you can argue they had a favorable run-in where if they teed up against either like the France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, they probably would have been out at that time anyway. I do feel for them in that manner where they, even though when you're talking about Weghorst, that's not most teams at this degree reaching a semifinal, that's not option B. That's like DE plan, and that's unfortunately what they had to do. And they were still very, very good at it, where it seems like what Ronald Koeman does, he has his side buying into the type of system that he wants to be able to figure out how just to win this individual game. I think that the good part for them, the reinforcements are there, where you're seeing a player like Jeremy Frimpong on the bench, Matej De Ligt, Mickey Van de Ven. You have the young, up-and-coming structural type of players that fit what this Netherlands team already does, with players like Ake and Van Dijk, that quality in defense, and building up from there. So if you get elite level defenders playing at elite level with even passive midfielders and attackers, you have potential to go deep into a tournament. And they, for the long term, I feel like that have that mapped out. I do want to throw a little bit of cold water, because I did hear the story earlier, and it was highly unfortunate. What I don't like seeing, and again, not to call individuals, it's just a funny story. Have you heard about what happened to Ian Matson?
He got called up late.
Called up. He was on vacation in Mykonos. His dad drove 6 hours to get his shoes for him. Comes and doesn't play a single minute of the entire tournament. Like, it's just rough. It's just rough. I do want to say great tournament, great for them. But that story, even though coming out of this tournament, I'm a little bit happy for them. I'm like, you know what? Fuck you guys. I'm glad you guys lost to me. You know, how do you do that to my guy? After what happened in the Champions League final, and now this, poor kid.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if he's still a Chelsea player at this moment. Likely he will. I can't say whether he will or not play for Chelsea, so might be a lot of traveling for him this offseason before he starts up next season. But let's take a quick break here, Mac. We'll be back previewing, of course, the Euro finals, and maybe even touching on the Copa America final coming up. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to Awesome Footy, guys. We are going to continue our podcast now, of course, previewing the big one, the finals of this year's Euros, and that's going to be between Spain and England. Mac, I have it on my notes here. This is a final between Spain, who is everyone's favorite team, and England, who are an evolved form, having learned from previous disappointment. So that being said, I think it's actually closer than people would call. If you're a casual fan, you think, of course, Spain, based on the tournament they've had, should walk this. And England, of course, with the disappointing tournament they've showed out for themselves, won't really stand a chance. But I think it's more, to use another word, nuanced than that. Mac, give us your takes on how you see this game playing out and then where it will be won and lost.
So I thought you were immediately going to go to everyone's most hated team is England, which I could see. I'm here for that. I definitely feel that vibe sometimes, but it is what it is.
You can't have everyone's most hated team if you have Bukayo Saka on that squad.
That's true. That's like, you just warmed my heart. Thank you.
Please continue.
This is my big day. But so in terms of this matchup, I do agree with you. It is Spain are the favorites, but I don't think it's clear cut where it's not as if they should play this game 10 times. Spain should win 7 of them. I think it's like a 55-45. So there's not too much difference between the teams, but I think there's a couple areas of the pitch where that Spain need to do well in to assert their dominance and come away with the win. And conversely, England do have areas of the pitch where I think they can get at Spain. To point out a couple of areas and zero in on them, I think what's going to be very interesting is how Spain apply the press. We can assume England, based off their last couple of games and argue what they played their best, is playing with the back 3, 2 wing backs, 4 in midfield, and a striker. We could assume that's how they're going to play. What Spain does is in the midfield, they press up man-to-man across the entire pitch. What that should mean, realistically, is that England should outnumber Spain in the center of midfield, closer to the halfway line, if they're able to break out of that first area of the press. So what I mean by that is, if John Stones picks up the ball, he's facing forward, that layer behind Declan Rice, the layer behind Kobe Mainu into Foden or Bellingham, realistically, that should be a 2-on-1 in that area for the both of them, either against Rodri, who when Fabian Ruiz has stepped up, or vice versa. The interesting part is that England, thus far this tournament, haven't really been adventurous with that pass, where they would rather go back to Pickford or rotate it to Declan Rice and kind of just do a bounce pass off of him to look for something else. So they've been so risk adverse in their passing, where Spain, the way they press, kind of allows you, hey, we're going to tease you with this risky pass. Can you play it? Because if you fuck up on the touch, on the turn, if the pass is a little bit misplaced, we're onto you. And then from there on in, it's a 3-on-3, it's a 4-on-4. And that's where Nico Williams, Lamine Yamal, their best players, they can get at teams versus them being more slow, methodical in possession, willing to walk it up yard by yard until they create that final third, opportunity in the final third, what we've seen traditionally from Spain. So for me, That's where Spain have to do well in those moments, making sure they're on quick at that press. They deny time if that ball does get fizzed into a Foden and Bellingham. And from there, they should see success against England because, again, they have been very restrictive and regressive, I would argue, in their play. I think, though, if England does break out there on the other side, the area of the pitch they need to do well in is, I would argue, the two areas that are Spain that they're weakest in. And I don't mean by quality. You may think that I'm getting hate because I'm going to name these two players. In all likelihood, players that are going to start are Carvajal and Cucurella on either side of wing backs. But both of them bombard forward, respectively on either wing. You see Cucurella overlap. Danny Carvajal is going to overlap like a motherfucker down the right side. So when they both release and England's able to fizz that pass in this shape that England playing it right now, there isn't Saka, if he's playing like a right wing back, if Trippier is playing at left wing back, they have to make so much space to get him behind those areas. But if that's a Foden or if that's a Bellingham, or again, in moments Saka gets behind Cucurella, those areas of the pitch, Spain can be very susceptible. And that's different from what we've seen in, let's say, Spain versus France, where Mbappe was left free a lot. He had a whole lot of time and space, but the ball really never arrived to him in those areas. So if England can break that first initial line, find those areas in behind, then I think Spain is starting to get stressed. Because if there's, let's say, through the course of the game, if there's two moments where Saka's one-on-one with, let's say, Laporte, I probably think that's going to be at least a goal, I'm going to assume. And then conversely, on the other side, same thing with a Foden or Bellingham. If they can break those while Cucurella and Carvalho are kind of lost in the head, and Rodri and Fabian Ruiz are not, neither of them are really blessed with pace, I think those moments England can kind of get at Spain. So I think there's two areas of the pitch, like I said, that I think either team can, if they take advantage of, they could walk in and win the game. And that's what I'm looking at going in. How do you feel about that? Or is there something else maybe that you anticipate or might notice or predict going into the game?
Yeah, well, the fact that you're predicting a back three, that's very interesting because I do think this has been the way they played the best in. Of course, getting results against Switzerland and the Netherlands. My question is it going to be Trippier or Luke Shaw who starts on the left? Because then, of course, we'll see a different side to Carvajal depending on who really starts there. If you're telling me it's Foden and Saka sort of combining on the left-hand side for Cucurella and then Trippier and Bellingham combining on the left-hand side, that looks like a good... I would take that matchup and I would like my chances on the break for England. And I mean that because, of course, we expect, I think, Spain to dominate more of the ball. I think just in general, they are more comfortable with the ball. You also have Rodri and Fabian Ruiz playing very, very well with the ball. However, like I just said, it really will come down to can Bellingham and Foden find Saka, Shaw, and even Harry Kane, who will, of course, likely start this game, or Ivan Toney or Ollie Watkins, whoever replaces him if he does need a sub, because I do think England will get their chances from the break rather than try to break a Spanish team down with possession. On the flip side, Spain will have a lot of the ball, and if I think if England are set with a back three and a good shape, very disciplined Declan Rice with hopefully Kobe Mino playing the same way, it'll be tougher to sort of match up and the numerical advantage that you previously had against a 4-3-3. It looks a little more different. So it's going to have to be a lot of good movement and very incisive movement from Lamine Yamal, Nico Williams, and Morata, who's of course going to likely start there. And Dani Olmo, who has been, of course, we're sad that Pedri will miss this game because he would have likely started. Dani Olmo, though, has been, I think we can argue, an improvement on offensively the output that they'll get. And of course, he's going to be sort of the floater that we expected Xavi Simons and Phil Foden to be in their last game. How will Declan Rice and Kobe Mino deal with that? Because it's not necessarily like they're going to bypass Morata, but you could argue he's kind of like decoy because you're expecting Olmo to pick up spaces in between those defenders and midfielders and then hopefully find some chances there. So that's how I expect the game to play out. It's really, really tough, though. It's going to come down to moments, I believe. And I think as neutrals, I would speak on behalf of neutrals. You expect and you hope, sorry, a early goal so that things can change and a lot of drama can happen. Of course, new storylines popping up all over the place. But I do have a feeling, Mac, it's going to be a slower paced game, much like Italy against England in the last Euros, where it was, I would argue, slow paced, even though we did get a couple goals early. Can England, though, Mac, put the past history away and finally get it over the line? Let me hear your thoughts on that.
I believe so. Yes, I think if you were to ask me, are they more favored in this game than they were a game against Italy previously? No, because I think that at that point I thought England were the better team. But for me, the experience that this team has compared to the Spanish team getting into this tournament, kind of winning in more, I'll say, quote unquote, tournament style football in a lot of ways, where it's a little bit kind of you're biting your nails, a little bit more on edge, and it's really been kind of brilliant individual moments versus it's the lack of fear in the Spanish team, I think, may come back to haunt them in this one game because it's at the final. Where when I'm talking about like those risky passes that you're fizzing into players that have to kind of accept it on the turn and you don't want to make a mistake, Spain has not shown any of that. They're going to do that game in, game out. And so far, it hasn't really bitten them. And at some point, it has to come back to bite them in their ass in a little bit. And I think the potential is in this game where in those moments where they try to fizz it into a Dani Olmo and he gets pressed by a Kobe Manu and a Declan Rice in that area of the pitch and in transition afterwards, England can take their moments, be solid enough defensively, which they can be, even more than Spain, I would argue, in those areas where they have made fewer mistakes. Sorry, in those areas of the pitch that even France did against Spain. If they can make fewer of those mistakes, capitalize on those weak moments in transition, I think they're one of the better teams suited to do so. So for me, again, it's definitely a little bit biased. I'm going to pick England to win this game. My prediction would be in extra time, England would win 2-1. I assume Spain are going to score first. I think it's going to be very played out similar to the Netherlands game, where then England are going to come back and respond. And I think that in some ways, I actually hope England aren't the team that scores early, because that very much will play into their hands of the previous matchup against Italy in the finals, where they scored earlier, like, oh shit, we didn't think we're going to be here. Let's just sit back and hope if we can win the game. I would rather that England's, if you ask Gareth Southgate, what's the picture perfect type of game? Score 0-0, going in 17 minutes, England gets a penalty or some bullshit call. They score a goal and see it out for the rest of the time period, because Spain's like, okay, they've not been in this position thus far in the tournament. But I think what will likely happen is Spain score first, England respond. I would say into the second half, it might be a moment of magic, what we've seen from a lot of these England players, Spanish alike, where a Bellingham moment, maybe a Foden moment, Kane has a moment, something like that, that gets them back into the game. And then because of, I would argue, the options on the bench of the changes that England can do, that's where they'll see themselves out in extra time. If I am foreseeing what happens, that's what again, probably wrong, but that's what I see mapping out, given the matchup profiles, given the individual players on the team, and how these teams have played thus far this tournament.
That definitely checks out, because I think on the flip side, if Spain were to win it, I think they have to win it in 90 minutes. With the depth of their squad, I don't know if they have the quality that England will bring off the bench. But that being said, they are going to be coming forward, and I think if Spain do score, I think it's very important for England not to lose their heads. And I think this is why I think it's a lot more even this time, because England have the experience of losing in a final previously. They'll have players that have been through it and know sort of how to get over the line for this. So it's kind of where, will Spain be good enough throughout 70 minutes of the game to sort of secure a good enough lead and then set up shop essentially the way they did against France? Or can England sort of find those moments in the sort of Spanish chaos, find a goal and sort of keep it tight enough so that if they leak another mistake, they're there to pounce. So it's going to be an interesting match, Mac. We'll, of course, be covering that in our next podcast. Now, let's end it off with maybe 2 quick minutes on the Copa America Final. Of course, the semifinals played out the last 2 days as well. Argentina beat Canada 2-0, and Colombia beat Uruguay 1-0 in their respective games, setting up a Argentina-Colombia Colombia final in Miami, in of course Messi's new club team's city. What are your expectations for this one, Mac? Of course, we could see a lot of cards, a very heated match in a very hot city in Miami. Could we see a back-to-back Copa America win for Argentina and Lionel Messi, or could Colombia beat the sort of odds and come up big and win against Argentina? What do you think, Mac?
So again, Argentina are the favorite, but again, I think it's close, a lot closer, similar to the Spain versus England matchup than people think. Because in these types of games, this is the only game that will go to extra time, if not before immediately going to penalties after full 90 minutes. Does that change the flow of the game where it always seems more hectic, where each team's either trying to be like, oh, we're trying to play for penalties, or just trying to barely escape penalties in some ways, where that extra 30 minutes hanging over your head, I think may have a large impact on how these teams kind of set up to play. In their individual matchups, the last time Colombia actually beat Argentina in a professional game was more than 5 years ago, and that was in the group stage of the Copa America in 2019. So that was quite a long time ago that this team, even though they don't play together that often, generally their games are quite contested. I'm very excited to see what happens out. For me, the players on the Argentina side that I'm really watching out for is really going to be in their center halves, because I would assume Argentina are going to have a lot of the ball. So it's going to be really much what they do in possession. Can they slow the game down and not kind of get stuck in with the chaos that we've seen thus far in the Copa America, specifically if we're at a 0-0 on the Colombia-Uruguay match, where Uruguay just literally lost their heads from the full game. They never really kind of got into momentum. Darwin Núñez, I think, had a couple of chances, wasn't able to finish. Luis Suarez, I think, hit the post. But they were so caught up in the tactical fouls, the delaying of time, that they kind of lost momentum. Whereas if Argentina are able to wrest control early and often, because they've been playing the center half duo of Romero and Martinez, and I think both of them thus far we've seen this tournament, even though they have had a history of being very much, let's say, South American type of footballer, they haven't lost their head. They've been composed. They've been great in possession. And even though it was unfortunate from my perspective and yours as well, that Canada did lose to Argentina, I think after the game, we saw one of the greatest villain moments in sports, where Rodrigo de Paul said after the game is like, oh, diving's part of our culture. It's what we're taught to do. It's what we need to do. No shame, and moves on. The job's done, that type of thing, right? So, again, Argentina, slight favorites. I think they should win the game. I think they need to be above the fray and not get sucked into it, be smart in possession. And I think they're going to get enough opportunities where even though if it's Julian Alvarez or Martinez playing on top with Messi, even if they don't have their finishing boots on, as long as of the 4 chances they get, they bag one away, that should be enough to get them across the line. That's my parachute into the Copa America final. What about you? Is there a certain matchup or certain player, or what do you expect to come out of this game?
Yeah, it simply comes down to, well, you covered a lot of what I was going to say already, so thank you for that. What I would say is something that's I think might go unsaid, is how easy Argentina have had of a run to the finals. Of course, topping their group against a group with Peru, Chile, and Canada, beating Ecuador in penalties, even though I don't think they really needed that. So I think that would have been the most scared they would have been to not repeat. And then, of course, beating Canada, who I think fought valiantly, but of course were underhanded towards the end. A big miss that Colombia will have is Daniel Munoz, who has played a very, very good tournament, and he picked up the red card against Uruguay and will miss this match. Whereas Argentina are going to come in fresh. Of course, they have an extra day's rest. Whereas Colombia had to face Brazil, Uruguay, and of course their group as well. I just think at this point, the experience that Argentina have from winning the last Copa and the World Cup as well, they just have enough to get over this Colombia side, who, if they win it, I'm very happy for, of course, James Rodriguez and our Liverpool boy, Luis Diaz, if they do, but I don't see it going their way on the night. So, of course, we'll cover that briefly as well in our next podcast. But, Mac, this concludes our podcast for today. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at House of _Footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well. hustlefooty@hotmail.com is our email. Next time you hear from us will be early next week when we'll have a new European champion, and we'll find out whether Argentina can go back to back. But until then, Matt, thank you for joining us.
Peace out.
See you guys soon.